The blizzard hit with such fury that Helena Davis could barely see her own hands gripping the reins of her terrified horse. She had been traveling through the mountains of Colorado Territory in late November of 1873, fleeing eastward from California with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small leather satchel tied to her saddle. The wind screamed through the pine trees like something alive and vengeful, hurling snow so thick it felt like riding through a wall of white. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and she could no longer feel her feet in the stirrups. The horse stumbled again, and this time Helena felt herself sliding sideways, too weak and cold to hold on any longer. She hit the snow hard, the impact knocking what little breath she had left from her lungs. The horse bolted into the white void, leaving her alone in the howling storm. Helena tried to stand, but her legs would not obey. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, knowing that to stay still meant death. The snow was already piling against her skirts, weighing her down. She could feel consciousness slipping away, the cold becoming almost comfortable now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as dangerous. Through the wall of white, she saw something dark, a structure. Helena forced herself to keep moving toward it, digging her frozen fingers into the snow, dragging herself forward one agonizing length at a time. The dark shape became clearer as she got closer. A cabin. Small and rough, but solid, with smoke rising from a chimney that the wind immediately tore apart and scattered. She reached the door and pounded on it with the last of her strength. Once. Twice. Then her hand fell to her side and everything went black. The door opened, and strong arms caught her before she could collapse completely into the snow. Helena was dimly aware of being lifted and carried inside, of blessed warmth beginning to penetrate the icy shell that encased her body. She heard a man's voice, low and urgent, speaking words she could not quite make out. Then there was nothing but darkness and the gradual, painful return of sensation to her frozen limbs. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a narrow cot near a stone fireplace where a fire crackled and danced. Heavy blankets were piled on top of her, and she was wearing a rough cotton shirt that was far too large for her frame. Her own clothes hung drying on a line stretched across one corner of the small cabin. A man sat in a wooden chair near the fire, his back to her, broad shoulders hunched as he stared into the flames. Helena tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed a small sound, something between a cough and a whisper. The man turned immediately, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to quick movement. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way. His eyes were a striking light brown, almost amber in the firelight, and they regarded her with a mixture of concern and something else she could not quite identify. Wariness, perhaps. "You are awake," he said, crossing to kneel beside the cot. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight accent she could not place. "How do you feel?" "Cold," Helena managed, though in truth she was finally beginning to feel warm. "Thirsty?" He nodded and moved to a small table where a tin cup sat beside a bucket of water. He filled the cup and brought it to her, sliding one arm behind her shoulders to help her sit up enough to drink. Helena sipped slowly, the water like ice and fire all at once on her parched throat. When she had drunk her fill, he helped her lie back down. "Thank you," she said, studying his face. "You saved my life." "The storm did not give much choice," he replied, but his expression softened slightly. "I am Marcus Thornton. This is my hunting cabin. I came up here 2 weeks ago to trap before winter set in hard. I did not expect the storm to come so soon or so fierce." "Helena Davis," she said. "I was traveling east from California. I did not expect it either. Marcus returned to his chair, though he turned it to face her this time. You were traveling alone, in late November through the mountain passes. There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity, but Helena felt her defenses rise nonetheless. I had my reasons for leaving quickly. He held up a hand. I did not mean to pry. Your business is your own. But that storm is not going to break any time soon. I have been watching it through the window. It is a real blizzard, the kind that can last for days. We may be here together for some time. Helena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her. I understand, and I am grateful. Truly? Rest now, Marcus said. You need to recover your strength. I will make some food when you wake again. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could help, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. When Helena woke again, the cabin was darker, the only light coming from the fire and a single oil lamp on the table. The storm still raged outside, the wind howling like wolves around the corners of the cabin. Marcus sat at the table, working on something with his hands. As her eyes adjusted, she saw that he was repairing a leather harness, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "What time is it?" she asked. He looked up, and a small smile touched his lips. "Hard to say with the storm blocking the sun. Evening, I think. You have slept for several hours." Helena pushed herself up on her elbows, testing her strength. Her body ached in a dozen places, but the dangerous numbness was gone. "I should help. You must have work to do, and I am taking up your bed." "That is my cot, yes, but I have blankets for the floor. And there is not much work to do while we are trapped by the storm. I have been up to check on my horse in the lean-to out back. He is secure enough, though not happy about the weather. Your horse, I am sorry to say, I have not seen. He may have found shelter elsewhere, or he may have kept running." A pang of loss went through Helena, though she had not owned the horse long. She had purchased it in Sacramento with the last of the money from selling her mother's brooch, the only item of value she had possessed. "He was a good horse. I hope he survived." "The mountains are harsh," Marcus said. "But animals often have better instincts than people about where to find shelter." Helena sat up fully, keeping the blankets wrapped around her for modesty. The shirt she wore fell to her mid-thighs, decent enough for the circumstances. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Marcus set down his work and moved to the fire where a pot hung on an iron hook. He stirred whatever was inside, and the smell of stew filled the small cabin. "A storm like this could be 3 days, could be a week. I have supplies enough for one person to last through the winter if needed. For 2, we will be fine for a month or more if we are careful." A month. The thought of being trapped in this small cabin with a strange man for a month made Helena's heart race, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had faced worse things than isolation. Far worse. "I will not be a burden," she said firmly. "I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing." "I believe you," Marcus said, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. He brought it to her along with a spoon. "But for tonight, you should just eat and rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to worry about the rest." The stew was simple but good, filled with venison and root vegetables. Helena ate slowly, savoring each bite. As she ate, Marcus returned to his work at the table, giving her space and privacy. She found herself studying him in the firelight, noting the way his hands moved with confidence, the straight line of his shoulders, the quiet competence he seemed to carry in everything he did. "Where are you from?" she asked between bites. "I cannot quite place your accent." "I was born in Texas," he said without looking up. "My mother was from Mexico, my father a settler from Tennessee. I grew up speaking both English and Spanish, working on ranches and farms. I have been a cowboy most of my life, moving from place to place, following the work. And now you trap." "In the winter, yes. In the summer, I work cattle drives or hire on at ranches. It is a good enough life for a man alone." He paused, then added, "What about you? What brings a woman traveling alone through the mountains in November?" Helena set down her empty bowl, considering how much to tell him. Something about the isolation, or perhaps the fact that he had saved her life, made her want to be honest. "I was married," she said quietly. "In San Francisco, my husband was not a good man. He hurt me. When he died in an accident at the docks where he worked, I took what little I could carry and ran before his debts could be transferred to me. I have family in Missouri. I was trying to reach them." Marcus looked up at her then, his amber eyes filled with something that might have been understanding or might have been shared pain. "I am sorry you suffered that. No woman should have to live in fear." "No one should," Helena agreed, "but the world is not always kind." "No," Marcus said softly. "It is not." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Finally, Marcus stood and brought more wood to build up the fire for the night. "You should keep the cot," he said. "I have slept in far worse places than a cabin floor." "I cannot take your bed," Helena protested. "You nearly died today," Marcus said firmly but gently. "You need proper rest. I will be fine, I promise you." Helena wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. The warmth of the fire, the food in her belly, and the safety of solid walls around her were combining to make her feel sleepier than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she murmured, settling back down on the cot. "For everything." "Sleep well, Helena Davis," Marcus said, and began arranging his own blankets on the floor on the opposite side of the fire. The next morning, Helena woke to find Marcus already up and moving around the cabin. The storm still raged outside, perhaps even stronger than before. Through the single window, she could see nothing but white. Marcus was at the stove making coffee, and the smell alone was enough to make her feel more human. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and running her fingers through her tangled hair. "Good morning. Coffee will be ready soon. Your clothes are dry now if you want to change." Helena took her clothes from the line, grateful to see that they had dried completely. Marcus turned his back politely while she dressed behind the hanging blanket he had rigged up for privacy. The dress was worn and patched in several places, but it was clean and it was hers. She emerged feeling more like herself. Over coffee and cornmeal mush, they began to talk more freely. Marcus told her about his years on cattle drives, the vast distances covered, the dangers faced from weather and terrain and occasional rustlers. Helena found herself fascinated by the stories, so different from her own life in San Francisco, where she had been confined to a small apartment, and her husband's increasingly violent moods. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. She had met her late husband when he came through town as a merchant's assistant, charming and well-spoken. He had promised her adventure and a better life in California. The adventure had been real, but the better life had never materialized. Within months of their marriage, he had revealed his true nature, a drinker, a gambler, and a man who believed his wife was property to be controlled. "I tried to leave twice," Helena said, staring into her coffee cup. "Both times he found me and brought me back. The second time he broke my arm. After that, I stopped trying. I just survived day by day, waiting for something to change. When he died, it felt like being released from prison." Marcus reached across the small table and gently touched her hand. It was a brief contact, but it sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You are free now," he said. "Whatever else happens, you have that." "Yes," Helena agreed, meeting his eyes. "I have that." The days began to blend together, marked only by the rising and falling of the light beyond the window and the endless howling of the wind. The cabin was small, perhaps 15 feet square, with the cot against one wall, the fireplace and stove against another, and the table and 2 chairs in the center. Storage shelves lined the remaining wall, stocked with supplies: dried beans and rice, salt pork, flour, coffee, and various preserved goods. Marcus had been well prepared for a winter alone. They fell into a routine of sorts. Marcus would wake first and build up the fire, start coffee, check on his horse. Helena would prepare their simple meals, wash the few dishes they had, and keep the cabin tidy. In the long hours of the day they talked, and talked, and talked some more. Helena learned that Marcus had never been married, though he had come close once when he was younger. Her name was Sarah, he said one afternoon as they sat by the fire, Helena mending one of her petticoats while Marcus carved a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. We met when I was working a ranch in Texas. She was the foreman's daughter. We talked about marriage, about buying land together, building a life. But her father did not want her marrying a half-Mexican cowboy with no prospects. He sent her to live with relatives in the East, and I never saw her again. "Did you love her?" Helena asked softly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his knife moving steadily along the wood. "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of having a home, a family, more than I loved her specifically. When she left, I was hurt, yes. But I also felt relieved. I was not ready to settle down then. I wanted to see more of the world, experience more of life. Now, though—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Now," Helena prompted, "now I am 30 years old, and I find myself thinking more about what comes next. A man can only spend so many years drifting before he starts to want roots." Helena understood that feeling more than she could say. She had wanted roots with her husband, had tried to build a home despite everything, but roots meant nothing if they grew in poisoned soil. "I think wanting a home is natural," she said. "We all need a place to belong." "Where do you belong, Helena Davis?" Marcus asked, looking up from his carving. She considered the question seriously. "I do not know any more. Not in San Francisco, certainly. Maybe not even in Missouri, though I have not seen my family in 5 years. Maybe I belong nowhere, or maybe I have not found my place yet." "Maybe that is not such a bad thing," Marcus said. "If you have not found your place, it means you still have the freedom to choose it." The idea struck Helena with unexpected force. Freedom to choose. She had spent so long simply reacting to circumstances, surviving rather than living, that the concept of actively choosing her own path felt almost foreign. But it also felt thrilling. As the days passed, Helena noticed changes in how she felt around Marcus. At first, she had been wary, keeping her distance as much as the small cabin allowed. Years with her husband had taught her to be cautious around men, to watch for signs of anger or possessiveness. But Marcus showed none of those signs. He was patient and respectful, always giving her space, always asking before acting. When their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same item, he would pull back with an apologetic smile. When she was changing behind the privacy blanket, he would step outside into the howling storm for a few minutes rather than risk making her uncomfortable. More than that, he listened when she spoke. Really listened, as though her words mattered, as though her thoughts and opinions were valuable. It was such a stark contrast to her late husband, who had barely acknowledged her existence except to criticize or make demands, that Helena sometimes felt tears spring to her eyes when Marcus asked her opinion on something as simple as whether they should have beans or rice with dinner. One evening, about a week into their confinement, Marcus was teaching Helena a card game he had learned from other cowboys. They sat at the table by lamplight, the deck of worn cards spread between them. Helena was laughing at her own terrible attempt at bluffing when she suddenly realized that she was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. It was such an unfamiliar feeling that she froze mid-laugh. "What is wrong?" Marcus asked immediately, his face filling with concern. "Nothing," Helena said, but tears were rolling down her cheeks now. "Nothing is wrong. That is what is strange. I just realized that I am happy. I cannot remember the last time I felt this way." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand in both of his. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "You deserve to be happy," he said quietly. "You deserve so much more than what life has given you so far." "So do you," Helena whispered. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the storm raging outside but the cabin warm and safe and peaceful within. Then Marcus slowly released her hand and cleared his throat. "Another round?" he asked, his voice a little rough. "Yes," Helena said, wiping her eyes and smiling. "Another round." But something had shifted between them, some invisible line had been crossed. They were both aware of it, though neither spoke of it directly. The accidental touches came more frequently now, and they lingered a little longer. When they sat by the fire in the evenings, they sat closer together. When they spoke, they leaned in, as though afraid of missing a single word the other said. 2 weeks into the storm, Marcus woke in the middle of the night to hear Helena crying. He sat up from his blankets on the floor and saw her curled on the cot, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Without thinking, he moved to her side and knelt by the cot. "Helena," he said softly, "what is it? Are you hurt?" She shook her head but could not seem to speak. Marcus hesitated only a moment before sitting on the edge of the cot and placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. To his surprise, she turned into him, burying her face against his chest as the sobs intensified. Marcus wrapped his arms around her and held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words in Spanish that his mother had once used to comfort him as a child. Gradually, the tears subsided. Helena pulled back slightly, wiping her face with her hands. "I am sorry," she said shakily. "I had a nightmare about him, about my husband. I dreamed that I was back in that apartment and he was alive and I could not get away." "You are safe," Marcus said firmly. "He is dead and you are here and you are safe. I promise you that." Helena looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. In the dim light from the dying fire, Marcus could see the fear slowly fading from her face, replaced by something else. Trust. And something more than trust, something that made his heart beat faster. "Will you stay?" she whispered. "Just until I fall asleep again. I do not want to be alone right now." Marcus knew he should return to his blankets on the floor. A decent man would put distance between himself and a vulnerable woman, but he could no more leave her side than he could stop breathing. "I will stay," he said. He lay down on the cot beside her, on top of the blankets while she was beneath them, maintaining that small barrier of propriety. Helena turned on her side to face him, and they lay there in the darkness, mere inches apart, looking at each other. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being the first kind man I have known." "I am not special," Marcus said. "This is just how people should treat each other. Maybe, but that does not make you any less special to me." Marcus reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "You are special too," he said quietly. "More than you know." They fell asleep like that, facing each other on the narrow cot, and did not wake until morning light filtered through the window. When Helena opened her eyes, Marcus was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy despite their closeness. Marcus sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I should check on the storm. Maybe it has broken." But the storm had not broken. If anything, it seemed stronger than before. The snow had drifted so high against the cabin that the window was half covered. Marcus had to dig out the door to the lean-to to reach his horse, which took the better part of an hour. When he came back inside, covered in snow and shivering, Helena had hot coffee and food waiting for him. "This is worse than I thought," he admitted as he warmed his hands around the tin cup. "I have seen bad storms before, but this is exceptional. We may be here for some time yet." "How are the supplies holding?" Helena asked. "Fine for now. We have enough for at least another month if we are careful, and when the storm does break I can hunt. There is good game in these mountains when the weather allows." They settled back into their routine, but something fundamental had changed between them. The careful distance they had maintained was gone. They moved around each other in the small space with an unconscious intimacy, anticipating each other's needs, working together seamlessly. When they sat by the fire, Marcus would often put his arm around Helena's shoulders, and she would lean against him. When they played cards or checkers at the table, their knees would touch underneath, and neither would pull away. One afternoon, as the storm continued its relentless assault on the cabin, Marcus was sitting in the chair by the fire while Helena stood behind him. On impulse, she had offered to trim his hair, which had grown long and unruly. Marcus had agreed, and now sat patiently while she worked with the scissors from her sewing kit. "Tell me about your dreams," Helena said as she carefully snipped. "If you could have any life you wanted, what would it be?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "I would want land," he said finally. "Not a huge ranch, nothing grand, just enough for some cattle, some horses, a good house with a solid roof and a warm fire. Maybe near a town where I could sell my stock and buy supplies, but not so close that I could not see the stars at night. I would want to wake up each morning knowing that I was building something that would last, something that mattered." "It sounds wonderful," Helena said softly, her hands pausing in their work. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "What would your dream life look like?" Helena resumed cutting, thinking about her answer. "I would want safety," she said. "A place where I did not have to be afraid. Beyond that, I suppose I would want similar things to you. A home, stability, maybe children someday if I could trust that they would grow up in a house filled with love rather than fear. I would want to look back on my life when I am old and feel like I truly lived rather than just survived." Marcus reached up and caught her hand, stilling it. He turned in the chair to look at her, his expression serious. "You will have all of that," he said. "I do not know how or when, but I know that you will. You are too strong, too determined not to." Helena set down the scissors and cupped his face in her hands. "You will have your dream too," she said. "You deserve it." They stayed like that, her hands on his face, his hand over hers, looking at each other with a growing awareness of what was happening between them. Marcus stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. He was so close now that Helena could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Helena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is not the time or the place. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I need to tell you something." "What?" she breathed. "I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Helena felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than pain. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "I did not think I could feel this way. I did not think I would ever trust anyone enough to feel this way. But I do. I trust you and I love you." Marcus leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Helena did not pull away. She rose on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning each other. Then it deepened, became more urgent, filled with all the loneliness and longing they had both carried for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I did not plan for this," he said. "Neither did I," Helena replied. "But I am glad it happened." "So am I." They spent the rest of that day in each other's arms, talking and kissing and simply being together. Marcus told Helena things he had never told anyone else, about the loneliness of his wandering life, about the prejudice he sometimes faced for his mixed heritage, about the dreams he had given up on thinking would never come true. Helena told him about the woman she had been before her marriage, full of hope and curiosity, and how her husband had slowly tried to break that spirit within her. "He did not succeed," Marcus said fiercely. "You are still that woman. I see her in everything you do." "I am finding her again," Helena said. "With your help." That night they lay together on the cot again, this time with no blankets between them. They held each other through the darkness, listening to the storm and to each other's breathing, marveling at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Helena had never felt so safe, so cherished, as she did in Marcus's arms. "When the storm breaks," Marcus said into the darkness, "what will you do?" Helena had been thinking about this question for days. Her original plan of traveling to Missouri seemed less urgent now. "I do not know," she admitted. "What will you do?" "I had planned to trap through the winter, then head down to Denver to sell my furs in the spring. After that, I usually look for ranch work for the summer. But now I find myself thinking about those dreams we talked about finding land, settling down, building something permanent." Helena's heart raced. "Where would you look for this land?" Marcus tightened his arms around her. "That depends on several things, on what I can afford, obviously, but also on whether I would be alone or whether I might have someone to share it with." Helena turned in his arms to face him. In the darkness, she could just make out the outline of his face. "Marcus, are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I know it is too soon," Marcus said quickly. "We have only known each other a few weeks, but Helena, I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe that all those dreams I had given up on might actually be possible. I do not want to let you go. I do not want to watch you ride away and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." "Then do not let me go," Helena said simply. "Ask me properly." Marcus sat up, and after a moment's fumbling in the darkness, he struck a match and lit the lamp. The sudden light was harsh, but Helena did not care. She wanted to see his face for this. Marcus knelt beside the cot, taking her hand in his. "Helena Davis," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I do not have a ring to offer you right now. I do not have much of anything except a horse, some traps, and whatever money I can get for my furs in the spring. But I can offer you my heart, my loyalty, and my solemn promise to spend every day of my life making sure you feel safe and loved and valued. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Helena felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Marcus Thornton, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus shook his head in wonder. "When I came to this cabin 6 weeks ago, I never imagined anything like this could happen." "Neither did I," Helena said, "but I am so grateful it did. Even the storm, as terrible as it has been, brought us together. I would not change it for anything." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future. Marcus would sell his furs in Denver as planned, and with that money, plus what savings he had, they would look for land. Maybe in Colorado, where they were now, or perhaps in Montana Territory, where Marcus had heard there was good grazing land available for reasonable prices. They would start small, build gradually, work hard and build their dream together. I want to marry you before we leave this cabin, Marcus said. I know there is no preacher here, no official ceremony, but we can speak vows to each other, make our promises before God. Then when we reach a town, we can make it legal and official. I would like that, Helena said. When? What about Christmas? Marcus suggested. If the storm has not broken by then, we can speak our vows on Christmas Day. It seems fitting somehow. Helena agreed, though she pointed out that she had no idea what the actual date was. They had lost track of the days in the endless white chaos of the storm. Marcus pulled out a small journal he kept and showed her the marks he had been making to track the passage of time. By his counting, it was the 3rd week of December. Christmas was less than a week away. Over the next few days, Helena worked on making the cabin as festive as possible with the limited resources available. She had a green ribbon in her satchel, originally intended to repair a bonnet, and she used it to decorate the one small shelf that served as a mantel above the fireplace. Marcus went out into the storm, braving the wind and snow, and came back with pine boughs that he had cut from the trees near the cabin. Helena arranged these around the room, filling the air with their fresh, clean scent. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind died down from a howl to a whisper, and the snow fell more gently. Marcus and Helena stood together at the window, watching the transformation with a mixture of joy and sadness. The end of the storm meant the end of their isolation, the beginning of the next chapter of their lives. It was exciting but also bittersweet. This cabin had become their whole world for nearly a month, a safe haven where they had found each other. Tomorrow we will speak our vows, Marcus said, his arm around Helena's waist. And the next day, if the weather holds, we can begin digging out and preparing to leave. I am ready, Helena said. Ready to start our life together. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed impossible after so many days of gray. The sun on the new snow was blindingly bright, and the world looked clean and fresh and full of possibility. Marcus and Helena spent the morning preparing for their simple ceremony. Helena wore her one good dress, which she had washed and mended. Marcus trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with water. They both felt the solemnity of what they were about to do. As the sun reached its highest point, they stood together in front of the fireplace, holding hands. Marcus had written out vows in his journal, and Helena had done the same. They took turns reading them, their voices steady and clear. I, Marcus Thornton, take you, Helena Davis, to be my wife, Marcus said. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to listen to your voice and value your thoughts. I promise to build a home with you, a life with you, a future with you. From this day forward, you will never be alone, you will never be unvalued, and you will never have reason to fear. This I swear before God and on my honor as a man. Helena's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows. I, Helena Davis, take you, Marcus Thornton, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner and your companion, to share your dreams and help you build them. I promise to trust you with my heart, my future, and my life. From this day forward, you will have my love, my loyalty, and my devotion. This I swear before God and on my word as a woman. They had no rings to exchange, but Marcus pulled a leather cord from around his neck. On it hung a small silver medallion that had belonged to his mother, a saint's medal she had given him before she died. He removed it from the cord and pressed it into Helena's hand. This was my mother's, he said. It is the only thing of value I own, and I want you to have it. One day I will buy you a proper ring, But for now, please accept this as a symbol of my love." Helena closed her fingers around the medallion, feeling its weight and warmth. "I will treasure it always," she said. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a handkerchief, one she had embroidered herself years ago with her initials. "I have nothing of value to give you," she said, "but I want you to have this. I made it when I was young, before I was married the first time. It represents the girl I was, the woman I am becoming again because of you." Marcus took the handkerchief reverently and tucked it into his shirt pocket, over his heart. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, sealing their vows. "You are my wife now," he said. "And you are my husband," Helena replied, joy singing through her veins. They celebrated their marriage with the best meal they could manage from the supplies on hand. Marcus had been saving a small bottle of whiskey, and they each had a sip to toast their future. They talked about where they would go, what they would do, the children they hoped to have someday. As darkness fell, they lay together on the cot as husband and wife, holding each other close, both feeling that they had been given an unexpected gift, a second chance at happiness that neither had thought possible. The next day, Marcus began the work of digging out. The snow had drifted to amazing heights in some places, reaching nearly to the cabin's roof on the north side. It took 2 days of hard labor before he could even reach the lean to where his horse waited. The animal was thin but alive, having survived on the hay Marcus had stored there. Helena worked alongside Marcus as much as he would allow, though he tried to do the heaviest work himself. On the 3rd day after Christmas, they had cleared a path wide enough for the horse and were preparing to leave. Marcus had his traps and his pelts, bundled and ready to transport. Helena had her small satchel and the few possessions she had brought with her. They stood together in the cabin one last time, looking around at the small space that had become so significant in their lives. "I will never forget this place," Helena said softly. "Neither will I," Marcus agreed. "This is where our life together began." They locked the cabin door behind them and set out through the snow. Marcus led the horse, which carried their supplies, while Helena walked beside him. The journey down the mountain was treacherous, the snow deep and the trails barely visible. They moved slowly, carefully, taking no chances. At night, they made camp in the shelter of rocks or trees, building fires and sleeping wrapped in blankets pressed close together. It took them 5 days to reach the town of Georgetown, a mining settlement in Colorado Territory that had grown up around the silver strikes in the mountains. The town was rough and rowdy, filled with miners and prospectors, but it had a hotel, a general store, and most importantly for Marcus and Helena, a church with a circuit preacher who happened to be in town. They got a room at the hotel, their first night sleeping in a real bed, and the next morning they went to find the preacher. Reverend John Mills was a kindly man in his 50s who had been riding the circuit through the mining towns for over a decade. He listened to their story with interest and agreed to perform the marriage ceremony that very afternoon. "You will need witnesses," he said. "The law requires at least 2. Marcus and Helena looked at each other, realizing they knew no one in this town, but the hotel keeper, a widow named Mrs. Porter, offered herself as a witness, and she recruited the owner of the general store, Mr. Chen, to serve as the second. That afternoon, in the small church at the edge of town, Marcus and Helena were officially married according to the laws of Colorado Territory. Reverend Mills had them sign the marriage register, and Marcus paid him with some of the money he had been saving. When they emerged from the church, Helena wore a simple silver band that Marcus had purchased from Mr. Chen that morning. It was not fancy, but it was real, and Helena looked at it on her finger with more pride than she might have felt for the finest diamond. "Mrs. Thornton," Marcus said, testing out the sound of it. "Mr. Thornton," Helena replied, smiling up at her husband. They stayed in Georgetown for 2 weeks while Marcus sold his furs and made arrangements for the next stage of their journey. He got good prices for the pelts, which had been well cured, and added substantially to their savings. They spent their evenings in the hotel room, planning their future, or walking through the town, learning what life was like in this rough mining settlement. Helena noticed that Marcus sometimes faced suspicious looks or cold treatment from some of the townsfolk, and she realized it was because of his appearance, the clear indication of his mixed heritage. It made her angry, this irrational prejudice, and she made a point of holding his hand and calling him her husband loudly enough for everyone to hear. Marcus would squeeze her hand and give her a grateful smile, though he cautioned her not to make too much of it. "I have dealt with this my whole life," he said one evening as they lay together in the hotel bed. "It used to hurt more when I was younger. Now I mostly just feel sorry for people who are so small-minded, but I will not lie, it helps to have you beside me. To know that you are not ashamed to be married to me." "Ashamed?" Helena said fiercely. "I am proud to be married to you. You are the best man I have ever known. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." Marcus kissed her then, long and deep, and Helena felt again the rush of love and gratitude for this unexpected gift that fate had given her. By mid-January, they were ready to move on. Marcus had heard from other travelers about good land available in Montana Territory, particularly in the valley of the Gallatin River near a settlement called Bozeman. The winters were harsh, but the summers good for grazing, and the land prices were reasonable for those willing to work hard and take a chance. It sounded perfect to both of them. The journey north took 3 weeks, traveling by horseback and occasionally by wagon when they could catch a ride with freight haulers or other travelers. They passed through stunning landscape, mountains giving way to high plains, winter gradually loosening its grip as they moved into February. They saw herds of elk and even buffalo in the distance, and at night the stars seemed close enough to touch. They reached Bozeman in late February, just as the first signs of spring were beginning to show. The settlement was small but growing, with a main street that boasted a dozen businesses and a surrounding area of ranches and farms. The people were a mix of farmers, ranchers, miners, and those who served them. Marcus and Helena took a room at a boarding house run by a German family and began the process of looking for land. It took them 2 weeks to find what they were looking for, a quarter section of land about 5 miles from town. It had a creek running through it, good grass, and some timber. There was no house, no barn, nothing but raw land and possibility. But when Marcus and Helena stood on the slight rise overlooking the property, they both knew this was it. This was where they would build their dream. Marcus paid for the land with most of their savings, leaving them just enough to buy basic supplies and tools. They would have to build everything themselves, and they would need to find work to earn money for food and other necessities until they could get crops planted and animals raised. But neither of them were afraid of hard work. They started by building a dugout shelter, excavating into the side of a hill and framing up a front wall with scavenged timber. It was crude and small, but it was warm and dry. While Helena set up housekeeping in the dugout, Marcus hired himself out to neighboring ranchers, doing whatever work they needed and earning money. He worked hard through March and into April, helping with calving season, mending fences, breaking horses. At night, he would come home exhausted but satisfied, and Helena would have hot food waiting for him. Helena found work too, taking in sewing and laundry from the townspeople. She was skilled with a needle, and soon she had more work than she could handle. She also started a small garden near the dugout, planting vegetables that would help see them through the coming winter. The hard work was satisfying in a way that nothing in her old life had ever been. She was building something real, something that belonged to her and Marcus together. By May, they had saved enough money to buy lumber to begin building a real house. It would be small, just 2 rooms to start, but it would have solid walls and a good roof and windows with real glass. Marcus worked on the house every spare moment he had, and Helena helped when she could, handing him tools, holding boards steady, learning as they went. One evening in late May, as they sat outside the dugout watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, Helena realized that she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She had been so busy, so focused on work and building their life, that she had not noticed. But now, counting back, she was certain she was carrying Marcus's child. She waited until they were lying together in the dugout that night to tell him. "Marcus," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He turned to face her in the darkness. "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Marcus was silent for so long that Helena began to worry. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Helena, are you certain?" "Yes," she said. "The baby should come in late fall or early winter." "We need to finish the house," Marcus said, already planning. "You need a proper place before the baby comes, and we need to save more money for supplies, and I should hunt more, put up meat. And we need to," Helena put her hand over his mouth, stopping the flow of words. "We will handle it," she said gently. "We will do what we need to do, we always have." Marcus kissed her palm, then her wrist, then her lips. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said. "A wife I love, a piece of land to call our own, and now a child. I never dared to dream I could have all this." "You deserve it," Helena said. "We both do." The news of the baby gave them even more motivation to work hard. Marcus drove himself relentlessly through the summer, working for wages during the day and on their house in the evenings and on Sundays. Helena worked just as hard, though Marcus constantly worried about her overdoing it. She would laugh at his concerns and tell him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was young and healthy and perfectly capable of doing her work. By late August, the house was finished enough to move into. It was simple but solid, with a main room that served as kitchen, dining and living space, and a smaller bedroom. There was a loft above that could be reached by a ladder, where they could store things or where children could sleep eventually. Marcus built a stone fireplace that drew well and provided heat for cooking and warmth. He made furniture from salvaged wood and leather, a table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for storage. Helena made curtains from flour sacks she had carefully washed and bleached, and she sewed quilts and pillows to make the house feel like home. She planted flowers around the entrance, and by September they were blooming cheerfully, bright spots of color against the raw wood of the new house. Every time Helena walked in the door, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was theirs. They had built it together. As fall approached and Helena's pregnancy became more visible, the neighboring ranchers' wives began to visit, bringing gifts for the baby and advice for Helena. She was surprised and touched by their kindness, having expected to feel isolated so far from town. But apparently word had spread about the young couple building their ranch from nothing, and people respected their hard work. Mrs. Sarah Daniels, who lived on the nearest ranch about 2 miles away, became a particular friend. She was older than Helena by about 15 years and had 5 children of her own. She taught Helena what to expect during childbirth and promised to be there when the time came to help with the delivery. "Out here, we look after each other," she said firmly. You will not go through this alone. Marcus was grateful for the friendship and support the neighbors offered. He and Helena had worried about raising a child so far from family and friends, but it seemed they were building a new community here, one based on mutual respect and shared challenges rather than blood ties. In October, Marcus and Helena celebrated their first anniversary of meeting in the cabin. They had been officially married for 10 months now, and so much had changed. They had land, a house, livestock purchased with Marcus's summer wages, including 3 cows, a bull, some chickens, and 2 horses. They had a baby coming soon. They had friends and a community. They had built a life. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked as they sat together on the porch he had built, watching the stars come out. "Marrying me so quickly, coming here, all of this hard work." Helena laughed and took his hand, placing it on her swollen belly so he could feel the baby moving. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life with you is everything I ever wanted. Even the hard parts are good because we face them together." "I love you," Marcus said, leaning over to kiss her. "More than I can ever say." "I love you too," Helena replied. "Always." The baby came in early December, on a cold night with snow falling gently outside. Mrs. Daniels was there, as promised, along with another neighbor woman, Mrs. O'Brien. Marcus waited in the main room, pacing and worrying, occasionally hearing Helena cry out and having to force himself not to rush into the bedroom. It was the longest night of his life. But when dawn broke and he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby, his heart nearly burst with relief and joy. Mrs. Daniels emerged from the bedroom, smiling widely. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but well. You can go in and see them now." Marcus entered the bedroom to find Helena propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the quilts she had made. Marcus approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His eyes were closed, and one tiny fist had worked free of the blanket and was waving in the air. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he gently touched that miniature hand. The baby's fingers immediately grasped his, holding on with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "Yes," Helena agreed. "He is. What should we name him?" They had discussed names before, but neither had been able to decide. Now, looking at his son, Marcus knew. "Miguel," he said. "After my father." "Miguel Thomas Thornton. Is that all right with you?" Helena smiled. "Miguel Thomas, I like it. Hello, Miguel. Welcome to the world, little one." Mrs. Daniels and Mrs. O'Brien stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were settled, then left Marcus and Helena alone with their son. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Helena, both of them gazing at the baby in wonder. "We did it," Helena said softly. "We built a life, and now we have a family." "Yes," Marcus agreed, "and this is only the beginning." The winter of 1874 was mild compared to the previous year's epic storm. Marcus was able to keep working throughout the season, and the livestock thrived. Miguel was a healthy, hungry baby who kept Helena busy, but filled the house with life and joy. Marcus would sometimes stand in the doorway, watching his wife nurse their son by the fireplace, and wonder how he had gotten so lucky. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing new grass, Marcus and Helena began planning the next phase of their ranch. They wanted to expand their herd, build a proper barn, maybe add another room to the house. They had dreams and plans and the determination to make them happen. On a warm day in March, as the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom on the hillsides, Helena stood on the porch with Miguel in her arms, watching Marcus work with one of the young horses in the corral he had built. The sun was shining, the breeze was gentle, and Helena felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. She thought back to that terrified, half-frozen woman who had pounded on a cabin door in a blizzard, running from a painful past and uncertain of her future. That woman had been broken, barely surviving, seeing no way forward except more of the same misery she had endured for years. Now she was a wife, a mother, a partner in building something meaningful. She had a husband who loved and respected her, who worked alongside her and valued her opinions. She had a home that was truly hers, not a cage but a sanctuary. She had a future bright with possibility. Marcus looked up from his work and saw her watching him. His face broke into that smile she loved, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners and showed the dimple in his left cheek. He waved and she waved back. Miguel's small hand caught in hers. Later that evening, after the animals were fed and Miguel was asleep in the cradle Marcus had carved for him, they sat together on the porch as they did most evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Marcus had his arm around Helena and she leaned her head against his shoulder. "You remember what you said to me that first night in the cabin?" Helena asked. "When I thanked you for saving me and you said the storm did not give you much choice." "I remember," Marcus said. "I think about that sometimes, how that storm could have killed me but instead it brought me to you. How the worst experience I could imagine at the time turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." Marcus tightened his arm around her. "I think about it too. If you had not lost your horse, if you had found shelter somewhere else, if you had arrived at the cabin even an hour later when I might not have heard you knocking, how different everything would be." "We were meant to find each other," Helena said. "I truly believe that." "So do I," Marcus agreed. "You are my whole world, Helena, you and Miguel. Everything I do, everything I build is for you both." "And you are my world," Helena replied. "My home, my love, my everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, one by one, until the heavens were filled with their cold, bright light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and one of the horses in the corral answered with a soft whinny. The breeze carried the scent of pine and sage and new grass. "I am happy," Helena said simply. "So am I," Marcus replied. "So am I. The years that followed were good ones for the Thornton family. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added to their herds, built a barn and a proper stable, planted an orchard that would take years to bear fruit but would eventually provide apples, pears, and plums. They weathered droughts and hard winters, illness and injury, setbacks and disappointments. But they weathered everything together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each challenge they faced. 2 years after Miguel was born, Helena gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sophie. They were tiny and identical, with Helena's blue eyes and Marcus's dark hair. The house seemed suddenly very small with 3 young children. So Marcus added 2 more rooms, one for the girls and one that could serve as a guest room or storage as needed. 3 years after the twins came another boy, whom they named Daniel. He was a quiet, thoughtful child, very different from the boisterous Miguel, but no less loved. Helena sometimes marveled at how full their house and their lives had become, remembering the lonely, frightened woman she had once been. By the time Daniel was 3 years old in 1880, the ranch was well established. They had several hundred head of cattle, a dozen horses, pigs, chickens, and dairy cows. Marcus had hired a young cowboy to help with the work, a kid named Billy who reminded Marcus a bit of himself at that age, hungry to prove himself and willing to work hard. Helena still took in sewing when she had time, though with 4 children and the work of the ranch, her time was limited. On their 6th official wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Helena with a gift he had been saving for and planning for months. It was a proper wedding ring, a gold band with a small diamond chip set in it. It had cost more than they could really afford, but Marcus wanted Helena to have something beautiful, something that showed the world how much he valued her. Helena cried when he slipped it onto her finger, though she insisted that the simple silver band he had bought her in Georgetown was just as precious to her. She wore both rings together on her left hand, the silver band as a reminder of where they had started, the gold band as a symbol of where they had arrived. That evening, after the children were in bed, they sat together on the porch as always, looking out over the land they had built together. The house stood solid and proud, lights glowing in the windows. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained and functional. The fields were green with growing crops. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. "We did this," Helena said, gesturing to it all. "Starting from nothing, we built all of this." "We did," Marcus agreed. "Together." "I want you to know something," Helena said, turning to face him. "I want you to know that every single day I thank God for that storm, for bringing me to your cabin, for giving me you. My life began that day, Marcus. Everything before was just prologue." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, those work-roughened hands that had built their home, raised their children, created the life they shared. "You saved me too," he said. "I was drifting before I met you, just moving from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something permanent. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a real home. You gave me everything." They kissed, long and tender, and Helena thought about that terrified night in the blizzard, how she had been at the absolute lowest point of her life, how she had thought she might die alone in the snow. She thought about pounding on that cabin door with the last of her strength, and Marcus opening it, pulling her into safety and warmth. She thought about falling in love in a tiny snowbound cabin, speaking vows on Christmas Day with only God as witness, traveling north to build a life from nothing. She thought about every struggle they had faced, every triumph they had shared, every moment of joy and sorrow and everyday ordinary living that had brought them to this point. "By spring she was wearing his wedding ring," Helena murmured, repeating words she had once heard in a song and that seemed to encapsulate their story perfectly. "What was that?" Marcus asked. Helena smiled up at her husband, her partner, her love. "Just thinking about our story. How a snowbound cabin held a cowboy and a stranger, and by spring she was wearing his wedding ring. That is us. That is our beginning. And we are still writing the middle," Marcus said, pulling her close. "With many more chapters to come." "Many more," Helena agreed. "And I cannot wait for all of them." They sat together under the stars, the same stars that had shone above that snowbound cabin so many years ago, the same stars that would shine on their children and their grandchildren and all the generations to come. They had started with nothing but each other and built a legacy that would endure. They had taken the worst circumstances and created the best possible outcome. They had found love in the wilderness and turned it into a life worth living. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Inside the house, one of the children cried out briefly in sleep, then quieted. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. A night bird called from the cottonwoods near the creek. Marcus and Helena sat together in perfect peace, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else since that snowy day in 1873. Together, with love and determination and unshakable faith in each other. As the years continued to pass, the Thornton Ranch became one of the most respected in the valley. Marcus developed a reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled cattleman. Helena became known for her kindness and generosity, always ready to help a neighbor in need, whether with nursing care, food, or simply a listening ear. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion from their parents' example. Miguel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to work alongside his father. The twins, Emma and Sophie, were as different in personality as they were identical in appearance. Emma was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and riding horses too fast, while Sophie was gentle and loved caring for the animals and helping her mother with the younger children. Daniel remained quiet but showed an early aptitude for learning, devouring every book he could get his hands on. In 1885, when Miguel was 11 years old, Marcus decided it was time to teach his son some of the harder truths about the world. They were riding together, checking on the cattle in the far pasture, when Miguel asked a question that had clearly been troubling him. "Papa, why do some of the people in town treat you different than they treat the other ranchers?" Marcus had known this conversation would come eventually. He reined in his horse and turned to face his son. "You have noticed that, have you?" "Yes, sir. Sometimes people look at you strange. And I heard one man in the mercantile say something mean about Mexicans when we walked in. He did not think I heard him, but I did." Marcus sighed, feeling the old familiar ache of prejudice, though it affected him less now than it once had. There are people in this world who judge others by the color of their skin, or where they came from instead of by their character and actions. My mother was from Mexico, your grandmother. Some people think that makes me less worthy of respect, even though I work as hard as anyone and have built this ranch from nothing. "That is stupid," Miguel said fiercely. "You are the best man I know." Marcus felt his heart swell with love for his son. "Thank you for that. But I want you to understand something important. The way those people think is their problem, not ours. You cannot control what others think or say about you. You can only control how you act, the choices you make, the kind of person you decide to be. You be the best man you can be, and those who matter will see that. Those who do not see it are not worth your time or energy." "Mama says the same thing," Miguel said. "She says that people who judge others by such things are afraid because the world is changing and they do not know how to deal with it." "Your mama is a wise woman," Marcus said with a smile. "Wiser than me in many ways, and she is right. The world is changing. In your lifetime, you will see changes I can barely imagine. Some will be good, some maybe not so good. But throughout it all, you must hold on to your values, your integrity. You must treat all people with respect and dignity, regardless of where they came from or what they look like. Can you promise me that?" "Yes, Papa," Miguel said solemnly. "I promise." They rode on together, and Marcus felt satisfied that he had planted important seeds in his son's mind and heart. The world would not always be kind to his children because of their mixed heritage, but he and Helena would make sure they had the strength and character to handle whatever came their way. As the 1880s progressed into the 1890s, the West continued to change rapidly. The railroad came closer, bringing more settlers and more commerce. Towns grew larger and more civilized. The wild frontier of Marcus and Helena's youth was slowly being tamed and transformed. Sometimes they felt nostalgic for the rougher, simpler days, but mostly they were grateful for the progress. Better roads meant easier travel to town. More neighbors meant more community and support. Better schools meant more opportunities for their children. In 1892, when they had been married 19 years, tragedy struck the Thornton family. Daniel, their youngest at 12 years old, fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Despite Helena's devoted nursing and the doctor's best efforts, the boy died after a week of struggle. The grief nearly broke both Marcus and Helena. They had weathered so many storms together, but losing a child was a pain unlike any they had ever experienced. For weeks, Helena barely spoke, moving through the routines of each day like a ghost. Marcus was not much better, throwing himself into work until he was exhausted enough to sleep. The other children grieved in their own ways, Miguel becoming even more serious and responsible, the twins clinging to each other for comfort. It was Miguel who finally brought his parents back from the edge of their grief. One evening, he gathered the family together and spoke with a maturity beyond his 18 years. "Daniel is gone, and we will never stop missing him. But we are still here. We are still a family. We have to keep living, keep loving each other, keep being grateful for what we have." Because that is what Daniel would want. He would not want us to give up on joy just because he is not here anymore. His words broke through the fog of grief that had enveloped Marcus and Helena. They clung to each other and wept, truly wept for the first time since Daniel had died. And after the tears came a gradual healing, not a forgetting but a learning to live with the loss, to carry it as a part of them without letting it define them entirely. They planted a tree for Daniel on the hill overlooking the ranch, a young cottonwood that would grow tall and strong. Every year on his birthday, they would go to that tree and tell stories about him, keeping his memory alive for the younger generation that would come after. The grief changed them, made them more aware of how fragile life could be, more determined to appreciate every moment with the people they loved. Marcus held Helena closer each night. Helena made sure to tell each of her children daily that she loved them. They lived more intentionally, more gratefully, knowing that nothing was guaranteed. In 1893, Emma announced that she was in love with a young rancher's son named Peter Morgan. Marcus and Helena liked Peter, who was hardworking and honest and clearly adored Emma. The wedding was held in the spring of 1894, a joyous celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the valley. It was the first time since Daniel's death that the Thornton house was filled with laughter and music, and Helena found herself crying happy tears as she watched her daughter dance with her new husband. Miguel took over more and more of the ranch operations, as Marcus began to feel the toll that years of hard physical labor had taken on his body. He was only 48 years old in 1894, but he moved like a much older man, his joints aching and his back frequently giving him trouble. Helena worried about him, but Marcus insisted he was fine, just getting older like everyone did. Sophie, meanwhile, announced that she wanted to become a teacher. She had always loved learning, and the idea of educating the next generation appealed to her. Marcus and Helena supported her decision, even though it meant she would have to go to the territorial capital for training. It was hard to watch another child leave home, but they were proud of her determination to make her own way in the world. By 1895, the ranch had been in operation for over 20 years. It was a successful, thriving enterprise, providing well for the family and employing several ranch hands. Marcus and Helena had achieved everything they had dreamed of during those long conversations in the Snowbound cabin so many years ago. They had land, a home, a family, a legacy. They had built something that would last. On what would have been their 22nd official wedding anniversary, though they counted from the day they had spoken their vows in the cabin, making it their 23rd. Helena was working in her garden when Marcus came to find her. He walked slowly, favoring his right leg, and his hair was now more gray than black. But when he smiled at her, Helena saw the same man who had opened a cabin door in a blizzard and pulled her into safety. "Come with me," Marcus said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." Curious, Helena wiped her hands on her apron and took his hand. He led her to the barn, where he pulled aside a tarp covering something in the corner. Underneath was a beautiful wooden rocking chair, carved from oak and polished until it glowed. "I made this for you," Marcus said. "For our anniversary. I have been working on it for months, a little bit at a time. I thought you might like to have it on the porch for sitting and watching the sunset." Helena ran her hands over the smooth wood, admiring the craftsmanship. The arms were carved with delicate flowers, and the rockers were perfectly curved. It was a work of art, made all the more precious because Marcus had created it with his own hands despite his aching joints. "It is beautiful," she said, tears springing to her eyes. "The most beautiful gift you could have given me." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You have given me a lifetime of beautiful gifts," he said. "A home, a family, a purpose. I wanted to give you something that showed even a fraction of what you mean to me." They carried the rocking chair to the porch together and set it in the perfect spot. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains they had once struggled through in desperate search of survival, Helena sat in her new chair with Marcus beside her in his old one. They held hands and rocked gently, watching the light change and fade. "You ever think about that cabin?" Helena asked. "About what our lives would have been if we had never met?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "I think I would have kept drifting, working here and there, never settling down. I probably would have died alone in some bunkhouse somewhere, unmissed and unmourned. You saved me from that life, Helena. You gave me so much more than I ever could have hoped for." "You saved me too," Helena said, "literally and figuratively. I was running from my past with no real plan for my future. I probably would not have survived that winter, and if I had, I would have spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, afraid and alone. You showed me what love could be, what partnership could be. You gave me back myself." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in the way that only people who have shared a life can be. Miguel came out of the barn, finished with the evening chores, and waved to his parents before heading to his own small house that he had built on the other side of the property. Emma and Peter lived nearby with their new baby, Helena and Marcus's first grandchild, a little girl named Rachel. Sophie was away at school but would be home for the summer soon. Their family had grown and spread but remained connected by bonds of love and loyalty. "We did all right, did we not?" Marcus said, breaking the silence. "Despite everything, despite the struggles and the losses, we built something good." "We did better than all right," Helena said firmly. "We built something wonderful, and it will continue long after we are gone. Our grandchildren will sit on this porch and watch these sunsets, and they will know that everything they have came from the love and hard work of their grandparents who met in a snowbound cabin and chose to build a life together." Marcus raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Helena Thornton, today, tomorrow, and forever. And I love you, Marcus Thornton, always and always." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, they continued to rock gently. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had made the most of the second chance they had been given. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the sounds and scents of the ranch they had built, the life they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. In the years that followed, Marcus's health continued to decline slowly but steadily. By 1900, he could no longer do the heavy ranch work and had fully turned over operations to Miguel, who had proven to be even more capable than his father. Marcus spent his days doing lighter work, repairing tack, keeping the books, and advising Miguel when asked. But mostly, he spent time with Helena, grateful for every moment they had together. They would sit on the porch in the rocking chairs, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Rachel had been joined by two brothers, and Emma was expecting her fourth child. Sophie had returned from her schooling and was teaching in Bozeman, boarding with a family during the week and coming home on weekends. She had attracted the attention of several young men, and Helena suspected it would not be long before there was another wedding. On a warm day in July of 1902, Marcus asked Helena to take a ride with him up to the hill where they had planted Daniel's tree. It had grown tall and beautiful, its leaves rustling in the breeze. They sat in the shade of the tree, looking out over the ranch spread below them. "This is a good spot," Marcus said, "peaceful. When my time comes, I would like to be buried here next to Daniel. Would that be all right with you?" Helena felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Do not talk about dying. We have many more years together." "Maybe," Marcus said. "I hope so. But I am 56 years old and I have lived a hard life. My body is wearing out, Helena. I can feel it, and I want to make sure you know what I want while I still can tell you." Helena took his hand, feeling the familiar roughness of his palm, the strength that still remained in his grip. "I will honor your wishes when the time comes, but I am not ready to think about a life without you. You are strong," Marcus said, "stronger than you know. You will be fine whatever comes, and Miguel will take care of you. He is a good son, a good man." "He learned from the best," Helena said, leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other under Daniel's tree, looking out over everything they had built together. Neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it. This was a moment to be remembered, to be treasured, one of the last perfect days they might have together. Marcus lived 3 more years, long enough to see Sophie marry a shopkeeper from Bozeman, long enough to meet 2 more grandchildren, long enough to celebrate his 32nd anniversary with Helena. But in the spring of 1905, he caught a cold that turned into pneumonia, and despite Helena's devoted nursing, he never recovered. On a morning in early April, with the first wildflowers blooming and the birds singing outside the window, Marcus died peacefully in their bed, holding Helena's hand. His last words were simple: "Thank you for everything. I love you." Helena held him for a long time after he was gone, memorizing every detail of his face, feeling the weight of his hand in hers, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for over 30 years. They buried him on the hill next to Daniel's tree, with the whole valley turning out for the funeral. People came from miles around to pay their respects to a man who had been respected for his integrity, his hard work, and his kindness. Miguel spoke at the service, his voice breaking as he talked about his father's legacy, not just in the ranch he had built, but in the values he had passed down to his children and grandchildren. Helena stood dry-eyed through the service, held up by her children on either side. It was not until that evening, alone in the empty house, that she finally allowed herself to break down. She sat in the rocking chair Marcus had made for her, looking out over the ranch as the sun set, and wept for all that she had lost. But even in her grief, Helena knew that Marcus would not want her to give up on life. He would want her to keep going, to find joy where she could, to be there for their children and grandchildren. So after a few days of deep mourning, Helena dried her tears and returned to living. She threw herself into helping with the grandchildren, teaching them to cook and sew, telling them stories about their grandfather and the life he had built. She worked in her garden, tended her flowers, took in sewing for pin money even though she did not need it. She attended church every Sunday and helped organize community gatherings. She kept busy, because being busy meant having less time to feel the aching emptiness where Marcus used to be. But every evening, as the sun set, Helena would sit in her rocking chair on the porch with the empty chair beside her, and she would talk to Marcus as though he could hear her. She would tell him about her day, about what the children and grandchildren were doing, about the state of the ranch. And sometimes, in the whisper of the wind or the call of a night bird, she would feel his presence as though he was still there beside her, still listening, still loving her from beyond the grave. The years passed. Sophie had 3 children. Emma had 6. Miguel married a woman from town and had 4 of his own. The ranch continued to thrive under Miguel's management, growing even larger and more successful than it had been under Marcus. Helena became the beloved matriarch of a large and happy family, the keeper of stories and traditions, the one everyone turned to for advice and comfort. In the spring of 1920, Helena celebrated what would have been her 48th wedding anniversary, counting from that Christmas day in the cabin when she and Marcus had spoken their vows. She was 65 years old now, her hair completely gray, her hands knotted with arthritis, her face lined with the marks of a long and eventful life. But her mind was sharp and her spirit strong. Miguel organized a family gathering to mark the occasion, and children and grandchildren came from all over. They filled the house with noise and laughter, spilling out onto the porch and the yard. Helena sat in her rocking chair, watching them all, feeling Marcus's presence beside her as always. Young Rachel, Emma's oldest daughter, came to sit at Helena's feet. She was 17 now, a beautiful young woman on the verge of starting her own adult life. "Grandma," she said, "tell us again about how you and Grandpa met, about the blizzard and the cabin." Helena smiled, always happy to tell the story that had become family legend. She told them about fleeing California, about the storm that had nearly killed her, about pounding on that cabin door with her last strength. She told them about Marcus opening the door and pulling her to safety, about falling in love while snowbound, about speaking their vows on Christmas Day with only God as witness. And by spring, Helena concluded, showing them the 2 rings she still wore on her left hand, I was wearing his wedding ring. Well, I was wearing his mother's medallion first, and then later the rings. But the important part is that we made promises to each other and we kept them. Through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through everything life threw at us, we kept our promises. We loved each other, honored each other, stood by each other. That is what made our marriage strong. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true and lasting. "I want a love like that," Rachel said wistfully, "like you and Grandpa had." "Then make sure you choose someone who treats you with respect," Helena said firmly. "Someone who listens to you and values your thoughts. Someone who works beside you as a partner, not someone who tries to control you or diminish you. Your grandfather was not perfect, but he was good and kind and true. He made me feel safe and valued every single day of our lives together. Do not settle for less than that." "I won't," Rachel promised. "I'll remember." As the day faded into evening and the family members began to drift home to their own houses, Helena remained on the porch, rocking gently. Miguel came to sit in the chair beside hers, his father's old chair, now his by right of inheritance. "Are you all right, Mama?" he asked gently. "I am fine," Helena assured him. "I was just thinking about how blessed I have been, how much I have been given. Even the hard parts, even losing your father and Daniel, they are all part of the tapestry of a life well lived. I would not change any of it." "Papa would be proud of you," Miguel said, "of how you have carried on, how you have kept the family together." "He would be proud of you too," Helena said. "You are so much like him, you know, not just in looks but in character. He lives on in you, in all of his children and grandchildren. That is the best kind of legacy, better than any land or money. He passed on values and love, and those will endure for generations." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead. The same stars that had guided Helena to that cabin door so many years ago. The same stars that had watched over her and Marcus as they built their life together. Helena lived 8 more years, long enough to see several of her great-grandchildren born, long enough to witness Montana's continued growth and development, long enough to feel satisfied that her family was secure and thriving. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1928, at the age of 73, in the same bed where she had slept beside Marcus for so many years. They buried her on the hill next to Marcus and Daniel, under the spreading branches of the cottonwood tree. The whole valley came to the funeral again, 3 generations of people whose lives had been touched by Helena's kindness, generosity, and strength. Miguel spoke at her service, as he had spoken at his father's, his voice thick with emotion as he told the gathered crowd about a young woman who had nearly died in a blizzard and instead found love, built a life, and left a legacy that would endure for generations to come. My mother taught us that what matters in life is not what happens to you, but how you respond to it, Miguel said. She faced hardship and loss with courage and grace. She turned tragedy into triumph. She took a chance on love when she had every reason to be afraid, and that choice made all the difference. Because of her bravery, because of her and my father's love, all of us are here. The ranch is here. This community is here. We stand on the foundation they built, and we are blessed beyond measure. Years later, when the Thornton Ranch had become legendary in the valley, when great-great-grandchildren walked the land that Marcus and Helena had first claimed with nothing but hope and determination, people would still tell the story. They would talk about the snowbound cabin that held a cowboy and a stranger, about the love that bloomed in the midst of one of the worst winters anyone could remember, about the wedding ring worn by spring, and the life built over decades of hard work and devotion. The house still stood, much expanded and modernized, but with the original 2 rooms at its heart, a reminder of where everything had begun. The rocking chairs still sat on the porch, now antiques, preserved and protected as family heirlooms. The hill where 3 generations of Thorntons were buried became a place of pilgrimage for family members, a place to go when you needed to feel connected to your roots, to remember where you came from. And in the quiet of summer evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, if you sat very still and listened carefully, some people swore you could hear the creak of those old rocking chairs, could feel the presence of 2 people who had loved each other so much that their love had literally built a legacy that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The story of Marcus and Helena Thornton became more than just a family story. It became part of the fabric of the valley, an example of what was possible when 2 people chose to face the world together with love and determination. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst circumstances could lead to the best outcomes, that courage and hope could overcome any obstacle, that true love really could last a lifetime and beyond. And it all began with a blizzard, a desperate knock on a cabin door, and a cowboy who chose to open that door and welcome a stranger into his life, never imagining that she would become his everything, that their love would build a legacy that would endure long after both of them had returned to the earth they had worked so hard to cultivate and protect. From that snowbound cabin to the thriving ranch, from the first tentative words spoken by firelight to the last quiet goodbye whispered in a peaceful bedroom, from the speaking of vows on Christmas Day to the placing of flowers on 2 graves under a cottonwood tree, the story of Marcus and Helena Thornton was a story of love conquering all, of partnership building something greater than either person could have achieved alone, of 2 broken people finding each other and becoming whole. And in the end, that was the truest legacy of all, not the land or the money or the ranch, but the proof that love, real and true and lasting, was not just a fairy tale but something that could be built, day by day, choice by choice, through good times and bad, until death and even beyond. The snowbound cabin where it all began still stood in the high mountains, occasionally visited by hikers or hunters who would take shelter there during storms, and never know that they were standing in the birthplace of a love story that had become legend. But the spirit of what happened there, the love that bloomed in that tiny space during the worst winter storm anyone could remember, that spirit lived on in the valley below, in the hearts and lives of every descendant who carried forward the values that Marcus and Helena had lived by. And so the story ended, as all good stories must, but also continued as the best stories do, echoing through the generations, inspiring new love stories, new partnerships, new legacies built on the foundation of courage, hope, and love that would last through all the seasons of life, from winter's harsh storm to spring's gentle promise and beyond.